There are athletes who win championships, and then there are athletes who redefine what their entire sport is capable of. Simone Biles belongs firmly in that second, much smaller category. For nearly a decade, she has been treated less like a competitor and more like a force of nature. A gymnast whose skills are so far ahead of the field that 4 of them now carry her own name in the official code of points. But somewhere between the peak of Paris and the middle of 2026, the story stopped being simple. What used to be a straightforward tale of dominance has turned into something messier. Health scares nobody can fully explain, a public feud that split her fan base, cosmetic surgery headlines, and a growing question mark over whether she'll ever compete again. Today, we're walking through exactly how that happened. To understand why 2026 feels so unsettling, you have to remember what came before it. Biles arrived at the Tokyo Olympics in the summer of 2021 as the reigning face of her sport, a gymnast who had already piled up medals at a rate nobody thought was possible. Then, in the team final on July 27th, everything changed in the span of a single vault. She went up expecting to complete 2.5 twists, and came down having only managed 1.5, stumbling on the landing and immediately signaling to her coaches that something was wrong. Within the hour, USA Gymnastics announced she had withdrawn from the competition, citing a medical issue that would later be identified publicly as the twisties, a disorienting loss of spatial awareness midair that can turn a routine skill into a genuine safety hazard. For someone flipping and twisting many feet above a hard floor, losing track of your body's position isn't just embarrassing. It's a kind of malfunction that ends careers, or worse. Biles pulled out of the all-around final and several individual events before returning for a scaled-back balance beam routine, finishing the games with a silver and a bronze, modest numbers by her own outsized standard, and numbers that triggered one of the more polarized reactions in recent Olympic memory. Some hailed her decision as a landmark moment for athlete mental health, arguing that no medal is worth a catastrophic injury and that walking away from a dangerous skill took more courage than pushing through ever would have. Others accused her of quitting on her country at the worst possible time, pointing out that immense pressure is simply part of competing at that level, and that stepping back mid-event let her teammates down when it mattered most. That split in opinion didn't fade quietly. It lingered across sports media and social platforms for months, resurfacing every time she made a public appearance afterward. She later described the aftermath in painfully human terms, admitting she broke down crying once she was finally alone, and revealing in a 2025 conversation with the French outlet L'Equipe that she spent roughly 10 days physically ill once she'd left the competition environment. It's worth sitting with that detail for a second. One of the most celebrated athletes on the planet, at the supposed peak of her powers, describing an experience that sounds much closer to a breakdown than a triumph. That contrast between the public image of invincibility and the private reality of what it actually cost her would go on to become a recurring theme in her story over the years that followed. What followed was silence. 2 years passed with no competitions and no clear signal of what came next. Just a long stretch of rehabilitation and reflection while the sport carried on without her. Then, in 2023, she reappeared at the U.S. Classic and slowly rebuilt her routines, her scores, and her confidence in front of an audience that wasn't sure what to expect. That comeback accelerated quickly, culminating in another world all-around title before the end of the year and a formal announcement that she'd be heading to the 2024 Paris Games. By the time she touched down in France, the entire narrative around her had flipped. She wasn't the champion who walked away anymore. She was the champion attempting the comeback of a generation. And the only real question left was whether her body and her nerve could still deliver at the level her legacy demanded. The answer, once she actually stepped onto the competition floor at Bercy Arena, was an emphatic yes. 3 golds and a silver pushed her career Olympic total to 7 medals and turned Paris into one of the most celebrated redemption stories in recent sports history. Her all-around performance in particular was treated as appointment viewing, and her floor routine drew the kind of standing ovation usually reserved for a career-capping moment rather than a mid-career return. All of it happened while she was quietly managing a strained, torn calf muscle picked up during competition, a detail that barely registered in the headlines at the time, but that, in hindsight, was an early hint of just how much physical wear a decade plus of elite gymnastics had already put on her body. It was, by any measure, a triumphant close to a brutal chapter. What almost nobody predicted was that it wouldn't be the end of the complications, just the start of a very different set. Except it didn't stay closed. After Paris, Biles stepped back from competitive gymnastics without any formal retirement announcement, just an open-ended pause. In interviews afterward, she talked about needing her physical and mental health to line up before even considering a return, framing the decision to compete again at the 2028 Los Angeles Games as entirely hers to make, on her own timeline. With 11 Olympic medals and 30 World Championship medals already banked, she had nothing left to prove and every reason to take her time. She didn't disappear from public life, though. Throughout 2025, she stayed visible. Award shows, sponsorship appearances, interviews, travel with her husband, Indianapolis Colts safety Jonathan Owens, whom she married in 2023. It looked, from the outside, like a champion enjoying a well-earned victory lap. Then came the moment that had nothing to do with gymnastics at all. In June 2025, a dispute broke out over a transgender athlete on a Minnesota high school softball team that had just won a state title. Riley Gaines, a former college swimmer who has spent years campaigning against transgender inclusion in women's sports, posted a dismissive comment about the team's star player. Biles responded almost immediately, and not gently, calling Gaines truly sick, accusing her of being a sore loser, and telling her to pick on someone her own size in a jab clearly aimed at Gaines' height. It escalated fast and spread everywhere. Within days, Biles walked back the tone, if not entirely the substance, of what she'd said. She posted publicly that getting personal with Gaines hadn't helped the actual conversation, acknowledged that the body-shaming remark had crossed a line, and said she believed the existing system for handling transgender athletes in women's sports failed to properly balance fairness and inclusion. Gaines accepted the apology while making clear she hadn't changed her underlying position, and the two have continued to spar publicly since. The fallout for Biles was real. Some fans praised her for standing up for a young athlete who had no say in the policies governing her. Others felt the personal insults undercut whatever point she was trying to make. And a third group felt betrayed when she softened her stance afterward. It was a reminder that Biles' platform now extends well past the gym, and that platform comes with a level of scrutiny no gold medal can shield her from. Later that year, in October 2025, she added a different kind of headline to the pile. In a casual TikTok video, she told fans she'd had 3 cosmetic procedures and invited them to guess which ones. Followers eventually landed on breast augmentation, a lower eyelid surgery, and a repair to an earlobe that had been torn years earlier. And Biles confirmed all 3 in the comments and in a follow-up interview with People, framing it as simple honesty rather than anything to be embarrassed about. She also mentioned trying Botox once and disliking the results after it left one eyebrow behaving strangely during training. None of it was scandalous exactly, but it fed into a broader sense that 2025 had become the year Biles' personal life generated as many headlines as her athletic legacy ever had. Then 2026 arrived, and the story took a turn that felt different in kind, not just degree. On June 6th, Biles posted a photo to her Instagram stories showing her wrist wrapped in hospital bands. Her caption was uncharacteristically bare. She wrote that she normally valued her privacy and wasn't the type to share something like this, but that almost dying hadn't been on her radar for that particular week. She called it one of the scariest experiences of her life, made harder by the fact that her husband was away in Indianapolis for preseason practice with the Colts at the time. She said she'd spent the week in bed recovering and thanked the people who had checked in, visited, or sent flowers, promising an explanation sooner or later. That explanation never really came. No diagnosis, no details about what had actually happened, just a brief and understandably guarded update from someone who had clearly been through something serious. The silence didn't stop public life from continuing around her. When a few Instagram commenters mocked her for posting vacation photos not long after the scare, Biles clapped back directly, telling one user flatly that she'd just spent 2 weeks on bed rest, a small but telling sign of how raw the whole episode still was. She went on to appear at the 2026 ESPY Awards in New York in mid-July, looking composed and glamorous on stage alongside her husband, which only widened the gap between how she looked in public and how serious she described the emergency itself. Then, on July 22nd, that gap widened again. It was Jonathan Owen's 31st birthday, and instead of a celebration, he was photographed accompanying his wife to what she described only as a medical procedure. Biles shared a black and white photo of herself in a hospital gown and hair cap, seated on a bed with Owens beside her, joking that of all days for this, it happened to land on his birthday. She kept the details private again, adding only a light-hearted note that she'd woken up from the procedure singing a song by rapper Bossman Dlow. She did not say whether this procedure was connected to whatever had frightened her so badly back in June. As of now, that connection and the actual nature of either event remains unconfirmed. The timing couldn't be more pointed. While Biles has stayed quiet about her health and vague about her plans, several of her Paris teammates have started moving in the opposite direction. Suni Lee, the reigning 2020 all-around Olympic champion, announced her own competitive comeback in the middle of July 2026. Jade Carey and Hesley Rivera had already signaled their returns before that. Even Caitlin Ohashi, the former elite gymnast and NCAA standout who had been away from competition for well over a decade, made her way back onto the floor at meets earlier this year. Put together, it paints a clear picture. The sport that Biles once towered over is visibly gearing up for Los Angeles 2028, with or without her. And every month that passes without a decision from her only sharpens the contrast between where she stands and where her former teammates are heading. She hasn't ruled anything out. She's been photographed meeting with her longtime coach, Laurent Landy, in July 2026 and posted about it publicly, which suggests the door to a return is still at least open a crack. But a coaching meeting is a long way from a competition entry, and the physical and emotional toll of the last 12 months, an unexplained brush with something serious enough to call life-threatening, a follow-up procedure of unknown scope, a body that's already absorbed more than a decade of elite-level gymnastics stress, plus a recent surgery of her own choosing, has made the calculus far more complicated than it was in the glow of Paris. At 29, with the clock on 2028 ticking louder every month, she doesn't have unlimited time to make up her mind, even if she insists the decision belongs to her and no one else. None of this erases what she's already built. 11 Olympic medals, 30 World Championship medals, for skills that carry her name in the sport's official rulebook, and a level of influence over women's gymnastics that will likely outlast her competitive career by decades regardless of what happens next. Her financial position reflects that outsized impact too. Estimates put her net worth in the tens of millions as of 2026, the overwhelming majority of it built through long-running endorsement relationships with brands like Athleta, Visa, and United Airlines rather than prize money, which in elite gymnastics remains a comparatively small slice of what a champion like Biles can earn off the competition floor. But legacy and future are two separate questions, and right now the second one is genuinely unsettled in a way it hasn't been since before Tokyo. The Biles who stood on the Paris podium in 2024 looked like the undisputed peak of her sport with nothing left to figure out. A champion who had already survived the hardest possible test of her career and come out the other side with her legend fully intact. The Biles of mid-2026 is a different figure entirely. A 29-year-old still recovering from something she hasn't fully explained, still working through the lingering fallout of a public controversy that never fully resolved, and watching former teammates take the first visible steps back toward a stage she hasn't confirmed she'll return to herself. It's a strange, uncomfortable middle ground for someone who has spent her entire adult life being described in superlatives. None of that uncertainty is a criticism of her, and it shouldn't be read as one. Athletes are allowed to age, to heal on their own schedule, and to keep private medical details private even when their public profile makes that harder than it would be for almost anyone else. But it does mean the easy, feel-good version of her story, the one where every setback is followed by an even more triumphant comeback, can't simply be assumed this time. The last 12 months have been messier and less predictable than anything Tokyo or Paris prepared fans for. And that unpredictability is precisely what's made 2026 feel like such an unsettled chapter in an otherwise storybook career. If there's one through line across her entire career, it's that Simone Biles has never followed the script anyone expected of her. Not when she withdrew in Tokyo, not when she came roaring back in Paris, and not now, as she navigates a stretch of uncertainty with far more questions than answers. Whether the next chapter is another improbable comeback, a quiet step into retirement, or something else entirely, nobody outside her closest circle actually knows. For the first time in a long time, that includes the people who've spent years assuming they could predict what Simone Biles would do next. And maybe that's the most fitting turn of all for an athlete who built her entire legacy on doing the things nobody thought were possible. That's where things stand for now. If you found this rundown useful, consider leaving a like and subscribing for more of these deep dives into the stories behind the headlines. Drop a comment with your own prediction. Do you think she makes it back for Los Angeles in 2028, or has this chapter already written its own ending? We'll be back with the next one soon.